I have had a number of engagements with Coillte in relation to their forestry strategy, and in respect of their pronouncements in relation to partnerships, I actually put it to them as to what that might look like, and they stated categorically that in the first instance and primarily it would be about engagements with local communities and farmers and existing foresters, but that wasn't their first instance. So I would be interested if the ministers are saying that they had a different view. In other words, that they were aware that it was actually precisely this type of Gresham House deal that would be pursued. In the Minister's statement that was circulated but subsequently wasn't read out, he acknowledges disquiet about this deal, but says, "I believe it is unwarranted." Now, that line was taken out of the speech you actually delivered. Am I to take it then that you don't stand over the suggestion that the disquiet is unwarranted?
Listen, my opening statement is the one I delivered here, Deputy Carthy, and that's the one I put together, and that's my opening statement. Listen, I understand the public position in this, and the public have made their view very clear, and I've listened to the public, and I've also looked and engaged and met with Minister Hackett with Coillte on this, and say our preferred option here and the way we'll be engaging with Coillte is about the way to engage with the state, the way to engage with farmers. But listen, in terms of the presentation that Coillte would have made it clear that they were looking at exploring private investment, as they did to you. And as I say, this is 3% of their overall ambition. Okay, so take it that it's not your preferred option. I take it then, and to give you the benefit of the doubt, that you didn't envisage this type of a deal, this with a Gresham House, with an organisation such as this, a British investment fund. Had you known before the deal was signed off on, would you have used your authority as a minister to stop it? Well, I think, and listen, we're all in the same position in this, Deputy Carthy. So yes or no answer? Listen, let me answer the question. You can ask them. In that Coillte made it clear to you, as well as to myself, Minister Hackett, and anyone else they engaged with, that there was a number of ways which they were going to try and step out their 100,000 forestation target. One of those was going to be engaging with private investment. Okay, so they then proceeded with that, engaging with ISIF, the experts. They've now done that deal. I think I've made it very clear what my view is in terms of how we step forward, and in terms of actually working with the state. Chair, you're running a very tight clock, so I'm not allowing the Minister to run down the clock, because here's the issue. Here's the issue, Minister. You did know before the 16th of December. And the reason why I know you knew is because I had heard of this potential deal with Gresham House, and I brought it to your attention. I raised it in the Dáil, and not only did I do it, Deputy Fitzmaurice did it, and Deputy Boyd Barrett did it. They told you in November. Also, we had an engagement with Coillte the week before that, and we each highlighted that this was the deal that was envisaged. I take it, and you can clarify me if I'm wrong, you signed a letter of expectation to Coillte in June 2022. And what was the purpose of that letter of expectation? Why did you feel that you needed to sign it? That is a standard outline from the Minister to the semi-state organisation in relation to the work that they'll be doing. And it was very much enabling them and to continue with the work, and to enable them to do the work in line with their strategic vision, which they would have outlined to yourself as well as myself and to others. So it was specifically to allow them to pursue this? Well, as Coillte would have outlined to you, Deputy Carthy, when they met you, the different ways in which they were going to try to do afforestation. One of them being availing of some private finance. Yes. The letter of expectation from myself as Minister was to enable Coillte to step out their work in relation to getting towards 100 hectares of afforestation, and to be able to explore the options which would facilitate them in doing that. So I take that this was specifically to allow them to pursue that course then. In relation to not this particular deal, no, it was the principle, okay. Deputy Carthy, of enabling some private investment. You've just informed us that Coillte are actually seeking to invest €10 million of their own funds in this joint venture.
why would Coillte not just invest that €10 million on their own part? Why would they need to use this, what is public money, to invest it in the joint venture?
Because one of the reasons Coillte stopped doing afforestation in 2004 was because up until that point in time they were able to avail of forestry premiums in the same way that anyone else could. But after 2004, or as a result of a state aid decision, they were no longer able to do that. That then meant that the financials for them to be able to do afforestation themselves didn't stack up in the way it had before. Also at that particular time in 2004, there was very significant afforestation happening by farmers and privately, so there wasn't the same need for Coillte to be involved at that time. As you know, in recent times, forestation has been very low. And figures of plant hectareage going under has been very low, and we need to step that up. So Coillte are looking to get back into that space. In order to do that,
what you're suggesting is
that
the €10 million
they have been looking at options as to how they could actually
You're
do
suggesting that the €10 million invested in this joint venture won't then be subject to the state aid rules, as opposed to were they to invest directly.
So what Coillte are looking at is, I mean, how they can be involved, how they can do plantation, how they can be enabled to do that in a way that is compliant with state aid rules.
Okay, yeah. and state aid rules have been cited not as our reason, in fact, as the primary reason. That's what Coillte told us when they were before us in December. That's what Pipa, Hackett's party leader, has said, that this is actually down to EU state aid rules. So let me ask you this: what efforts, if you can be as concise as possible, have you and your department made in respect of ensuring that state aid rules are changed so as to allow Coillte to actually invest directly without the need for a joint venture?
Well, new state aid rules are just in place now since the 1st of January, so it gives us
it
gives us the opportunity now to engage on that issue. I suppose our priority at the moment is to get the forestry programme up and running, and we're engaging closely with the Commission on that. There's a lot of work even prior to this, at the end of last year it initiated, and we're engaging closely with the Commission now to get our forestry programme up and running.
But the state aid rules are in place?
They're in place. The rules are in place since 1st of January.
So what I'm asking is, in advance of that, what efforts did you make to ensure that those state aid rules would actually allow Coillte to invest directly as opposed to the need for these type of joint ventures?
Well, the state aid rules are we have to adhere to the state aid rules. They're from the European Commission, so we didn't know what those, it wasn't available for us to apply for until the 1st of January. And that's something we can certainly look into now.
No, well, actually, because the state aid rules have been under review for some time. In fact, the Commission carried out a review of the state aid instruments for agriculture, forestry and rural areas. And your department in 2021 actually made a submission to that, actually got involved itself in the consultation process, and the European Commission very helpfully actually published all of the submissions they received from each government department. And I have the one from Ireland here. There isn't a single reference to Coillte and the fact that state aid rules actually precluded our public forestry body, publicly owned forestry body, from actually engaging. So my question is there anything in writing to suggest that your department has actually sought proactively to change these state aid rules?
So, well, listen, I mean, it is the reality that since 2004, Coillte haven't been able to avail of premiums. That has been the reality. Okay, so and as I say, Coillte have been looking at the 100,000 hectares of forestation. They've been looking to enable mechanisms to do that. There's three different options. Public land is one of those options.
No, I'm asking a specific question.
Public land is one of them. Also then the creation of nature forests, and also one of the options which they're exploring in relation to partnering for some private investment. So listen, what we, in terms of our meeting with, and obviously as I say, Coillte were stepping out what they'd announced that they would and how they could get to that stage. But we have been meeting and met with them last week. It is our clear intention to work to try and have the state more clearly work with them. In order to enable that, we're now going to be considering all of the obstacles that may be there, if any, to being able to enable us to work more closely with them. We know the challenges there in afforestation. We're going to explore, for example, the potential in relation to the state buying more land, etc.
You're either purposely missing the point, or you're simply missing the point.
We also can look at the opportunity in relation to premiums and revisiting that issue issue in relation
Okay,
to
so
state,
here's the issue. The state aid rules, the new state aid rules are in place since the 1st of January. My question to you was, what did you do proactively to try and ensure that the state aid rules would actually address what Coillte said was the reason why they were engaging and needed a private element to their funding, which was the state aid rules. What I've pointed you to is what is a written record that shows your department, when they had an opportunity to consult with the European Commission, didn't make reference to that issue. And I've asked you if there is any written record, perhaps you could provide it. But I'm just because I'm conscious of the time frame. As I say, as it happens, the new state aid rules on first reading, and we'll be looking for this clarification, but there actually are significant changes to the 2014 rules as they were, and to my eye will actually allow for Coillte to actually invest directly. Now, considering that Coillte have said that the reason they need these public-private partnership element is the state aid rules, the fact that the state aid rules came into place on the 1st of January that may allow them to invest directly, what the hell were they doing signing a contract on the 16th of December, a mere fortnight before the new state aid rules came into place that has been universally rejected? And I'll ask that question, and I'll ask my final question in case the chairman doesn't allow me to. Knowing what we now know, and knowing what you have said in respect of preferred options and all the rest, and the realities as to what these deals look like for communities and the resistance that the forestry sector and farmers have quite clearly let known, and the unanimity of this committee, and I think virtually everybody across both houses of the Oireachtas, will you now issue a new letter of expectation to Coillte, instructing them not to engage further in these type of deals? That way, at least we can put the line, whether or not we can argue in terms of the Gresham House deal. I believe fundamentally you can stop it, but in respect of future ones, you absolutely can, beyond doubt, by issuing a letter of expectation. So my question is, will you do that?
Okay, a brief answer now, Minister.
Yeah. So listen, I think I've been very clear, Deputy Carthy, that the way we want to go forward is working with Coillte in terms of working with them, with the state. I've asked them to reflect on how we can do that in a way that will work really well. We will then work to look at the state aid to try and make that work and see how that would work and fit into that and make and address all of that. So that's the way we'll go forward. Whenever the updated letter is, or if there's going to be an updated letter, it will reflect that. In the meantime, I'll be working very closely with them. Coillte are very clear from the meeting they've had with us how we want to proceed. It's backing farmers, it's working with farmers, it's working with the state very much. But let's be fair to Coillte as well. Let's be fair to Coillte. They were stepping out an approach which they had very clearly communicated to ourselves and indeed to all of you, which is very much in the public domain, and stepping that out in the way that is the legal way for them to do it. But there's no doubt, there's no doubt that the way we want to go forward is the way we have laid out here today.
Just in relation to the new forestry programme that was announced in November, were Coillte in touch with your department in respect of the time frame of that, when that announcement would be made, when those details would be made public?
The sector were in touch in relation to it. It was one of their asks that they were given sight of that, because the forestry sector themselves, in terms of the foresters and the companies, wanted to have an indication of what was coming ahead, so they could engage with their farmers on the ground. That was an ask from the sector. I know that's a good answer, but it's not the answer to the question I asked. I said, were Coillte in touch with in discussions with the department in respect of when that announcement would be made and the details of it made public?
I mean, I think it was always clear when, I mean, anybody would have known when, I mean, that it was to start from January, and the way we're answering questions in the Dáil and Senate all the time. It was public information. So
the answer is no, there was no specific engagement with Coillte on this issue.
I don't think anybody would have had
You can see the suspicions people will have that it was so soon after that announcement that the final deal with Gresham House was signed off on, because the timing of the Gresham House deal doesn't make sense otherwise, because it was just a week before the new state aid rules would come into place. The state aid rules, which Coillte have cited as the reason why they needed this private entity in the first place.
They would have known the state aid rules were in January anyway, but the pressure, the timing of the publication of the proposed programme was entirely, well, from my perspective and from my engagement, was due to the sector itself, that the forestry companies wanted to give some sort of assurances to their farmers.
As I say, I asked a specific question, the answer is no, I take it. In terms of the agreement that Coillte have now with Gresham House, which is for a €200 million investment, 25 million of which is coming from our own body, and then Coillte apparently, and I'll come to this in a minute, are putting forward 10 million. What happens if Gresham House don't manage to get 200 million in investors? Can Coillte pull out of the deal?
Question for Gresham House, I guess.
Or for
Coillte.
Have you not asked them that question?
I don't know the answer to that question. My understanding, I mean, I
But
don't.
you've said you don't. This isn't your favoured option. Isn't a good way to maybe stop it? Tell investors we don't want you investing in this fund, just in case there's any other state-owned bodies, banks perhaps that we have shareholders that might be considering. Say no, stay away from it. This has universal opposition from environmentalists, from farmers, from local communities, from the timber sector. This is actually going to damage our prospects of reaching our afforestation targets. So therefore, here's a message from the Irish government: please don't invest in this because it's not our favoured option.
Look, I mean, Coillte and ISIF have entered into contractual obligations in regard to that, which, as I say, is 1% of our total ambition to 2050. We have a lot of work to be getting on with in terms of working with Coillte and working with farmers to support them in afforestation, and our approach now in relation to Coillte is seeing how we can support them.
But the question I've asked is whether or not Coillte have secured an obligation or an opt-out clause if Gresham House don't actually pony up in terms of the full level of investment.
I mean, that's a contractual deal between Coillte and ISIF, and
you're the shareholder of Coillte.
but it's a contractual deal that Coillte have entered into with ISIF and Gresham House. So listen, I'm not aware. I'm not aware of the finer detail of all of the contracts.
Okay, so let me ask this then. In terms of one of the big issues, one of the reasons all of the engagements, if you met with SIFA, they would tell you, along with lots of other farm organisations, you mentioned met with the IFA, and the chair would be the first to tell you. The thing that has caused more consternation has been the failure of the department in respect of ash dieback to adequately compensate farmers for that. But my question isn't relating to that. It is whether or not in this deal Gresham House have secured protections for the likes of invasive diseases or any other areas that perhaps farmers wouldn't be protected if they were to enter the forestry programme. Are you aware of any of those protections being provided by Coillte in terms of this deal?
Any which protections, Deputy Carthy?
Protections for the investors in respect of, for example, invasive diseases impacting on the forestry crop or on any other areas, on natural disasters, or generally speaking, when investment funds enter into negotiations, they can be, if they're dealing with people that aren't up to them, very good at putting in clauses that ensure that they're protected from any potential loss, as opposed to the people that they're in partnership with. Have you got assurances from Coillte that the state isn't going to be left on the hook for things like an ash dieback type incidents, and that it will be the investors that will take the hit, as would be the natural case of?
Listen, I don't have all the finer detail of the agreement, Deputy Carthy. It's our focus, and when we met with Coillte last week, was to get an update in relation to where they're at with it, their contractual obligations, and in particular to focus on how we, as a government and as a state, can work with them going forward in terms of supporting their afforestation objectives. I simply don't have the finer contractual details.
So in terms of the one thing that most people find bizarre, just can't get their heads around, because this has been sold by Coillte in terms of expanding the forestry programme. And as I mentioned last night in the debate, 3,500 of the 12,000 hectares in terms of this initial deal is only going to be for new afforestation. The other 8,500 hectares is actually going to be existing forestry land. Who owns that land currently, and what benefit is there to the state for Gresham House taking control of land that is already forested?
I know Coilte's objective, and certainly in the way we will be supporting them to do more afforestation, Coilte's objective was to manage forests in an effective way for the environment and also for the climate. So in relation to, as you know, mature forestry, when somebody might have planted it 40 years ago and they come up now and it's harvested, They mightn't want to go, or maybe it's normally not the same person that would have planted in the first place. It might be their son or daughter or niece or nephew that's there now is doing the harvesting. They mightn't want to go and do the planting again and wait the 40 plus years or 30, 40 years and invest in that. And there is a bit of there is therefore often a market in that space. Where
I can understand why some of that land might become available, but I'm asking what's the benefit to the state?
Coiltte's objective there is to be able to manage that in a way that means that the public have access to it. That means it's done in a way 50% for nature, 50% for conifer, and it's done in a way that's at the highest standards from a sustainability point of view.
This is Gresham House purchased land. So are you suggesting that the existing forestry that Gresham House are purchasing will be 50%?
You're asking what rationale Coillte has in relation to doing afforestation going forward, and they've obviously...
No, I'm sorry then, I didn't make the question clear. As part of this Gresham House deal, the vast bulk of the land that is going to be purchased is existing forestry land. The question I'm asking is, what is the benefit to the state in that?
Well, again, if it's managed according to the Coillte protocols, and if it's Coillte managed, then it'll be done to the highest of standards. So that's that's the way Coillte would look at it.
So do you intend to carry out an appraisal as to what that might mean for local forestry companies that might currently be taking care of that land, and what the implications might be for them from a social and economic point of view, what that might mean for local economies?
So what we plan to do, listen, I mean, this is 1% of the overall target. What we plan to do is work with Coillte to step out and look at how we can support them going forward. They've signed up to a contractual obligation, which will see 4,000 of new afforestation, 8,000 of existing forest. They're committed to that with Irish Strategic Investment Fund and Gresham House. We're going to work with them to see how we can do a lot more going forward, working with the state.
My final point is, I have to say, I don't buy your lines that this isn't your favourite option. My view is that that public opposition has brought you to that point. But you have a way of proving me wrong and proving any critics wrong, by ensuring that this doesn't happen again. The Coillte don't engage in this type of an investment programme. And there's two ways you can do that. The first is, you've mentioned here today, the Coillte are planning to invest €10 million in this investment fund. You're the shareholder. It has to be approved by government. Such an investment, you can stop it. You can say to Coillte, if you have €10 million to invest, you buy the land so that it remains entirely 100% in public ownership. And the second thing you can do is issue a letter of expectation, a new letter of expectation to Coillte, making it crystal clear that the primary shareholder in the company doesn't want them to engage in these type of investment programmes, and instead pursue a route that the state aid rules can be used in a way in which we can actually allow Coillte to do this, either on their own or in conjunction with local communities. So my question is, will you ensure that the €10 million isn't invested in this programme, and will you issue a new letter of expectation, setting out clearly what you have told this committee to the board of Coillte?
So first of all, in relation to the fund as it stands, ISIF have invested €25 million, which would be national government funding so far. Coillte have made a request in relation to investing 10 million. We have sent that now to New Era for their assessment.
You approved that?
No, I wait now till I get New Era to assess it and come back and give their advice, okay? And only after that then can we assess it.
You can stop it. Isn't that true in terms of the legislation?
It'll be our decision then to decide what to do, okay? So we'll first of all get the advice from New Era. Then the consideration will be, if it's a €200 million fund, and Coillte were investing, for example, €10 million into it, well, that would be 10 million extra of the 200 million fund, which would be nationally owned rather than owned by investors. So that's something we could reflect on. We'll reflect on whether we don't allow any of it. We'll also reflect on whether we would maybe encourage them to invest more, so that more of the 200, more of the two. So, for example, if Coillte had more ownership of it, then it would mean there'd be less private ownership of it.
Why would they have 5% of something would not be better than 100% of something?
Those are, and I'll listen to your views and perspectives on that as well. What you're advocating there is that Coillte wouldn't put in 10 million, and that would mean that there would be 10 million from private investors instead to replace that Coillte 10 million. That's what would be the. What
I'm suggesting is, if you're saying that a programme that Coillte have invested in, or Coillte have agreed, the deal is done, this is your position, you can't do anything about it, but it's not actually your preferred option, why then, if it's not your preferred option, would you even consider?
Well, because we're going to support Coillte, and we're going to look at supporting Coillte to do all the rest in terms of working with the state, okay, and working with farmers. That's what we're going to do, right? But then if you take what Coillte has already signed up to, which is working with ISIF and Gresham House for a 200 million fund, which they have the option of investing in. So if they invest in that, then that means that they're using up some of the space. It means the state will own more of it. Okay.
If they also encourage private investors to follow suit.
They're already signed up to do it.
That would be the real reason.
So if they don't invest in it, then it'll be instead it would be more private investment. So your objective would mean that more of the 200 million euro would be private
My
investment.
objective is to scupper the deal. It should be your objective as well.
That would be the,
in terms of the letter of expectation, will you answer that
that would be
question?
what you would be proposing there in terms of
proposing to scupper the deal. The letter of expectation, are you going to issue that?
So we regularly issue letters of expectation. We'll do that again whenever it becomes.
Irrespective of what I'm after outlining.
In the meantime, what we're doing, even more so than that, Deputy Carthy, we're working very closely with Coillte to see how we can support them, exploring how we can work together and exploring how we can ensure.
Coillte are pursuing options that aren't your preferred option. So do you need to set them straight? And the way you do that is through a letter of expectation.
You obviously haven't been listening to what I said. We met them last week. We'll be working closely with them, and we're exploring with Coillte now the options as to how we as a state can support them and also how they can work with farmers.
Okay.
And if you've any ideas that might be useful.
After giving you two there.
Any ideas that might be useful.
After giving you two there, and you're waffling, you're refusing to commit.
And some of them actually are counterproductive to what you're saying you want to achieve.